Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. You sound tired today.
Tired?
Yeah, you were just like, that's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. Well,
You didn't have your usual jovial intro.
Yeah, well, I'm also very tired because we've recorded 300 episodes in the course of a couple of days.
We've recorded 300 episodes, in fact, in a row.
And then have been
We've just been releasing them every Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah. How many episodes did we record till we killed each other? Who knows?
We'll find out.
If you're listening to these episodes, then they were released in our will.
We've been really good, though. We've been predicting all these PAXs that we're planning to go to and accurately recreating the voices of people that we think we'll meet.
It's true. Well, that's mostly producer Doug. He just puts on different voices.
He's very talented with his impressions.
The producer? Yes, he is. Well, this is our 300th episode if we've done our math right. Plus or minus probably another 30 or 40 episodes of non-sequential numbered episodes.
Yeah, we
plus
have some
also
spin-offs.
We have a 0, we have some spin-offs. But this is our 300th core episode in the Classic Gaming Brothers cinematic universe.
That's right. We're getting up there with Marvel numbers. You know, I think we have to record like 300 more, and we'll be probably right in place with how many MCU movies there are. Is that a timely joke? I don't know.
I mean, I haven't watched an MCU movie in a while because there's been so many of them. I just haven't been able to keep up.
I liked Fantastic Four a lot. That was really good.
Here it is, 300 episodes. There's almost 1 year's worth of content, or at least 1 year's worth of content if you listen to one episode per day.
Almost, yeah. We have to get to 56?
65.
Oh, 65. I don't know.
What is 56? Did you just flip
I
the
thought it was
numbers in your
350.
head?
Yeah, I just flipped the numbers in my head.
Yeah, it's 365.
We have to record an extra one, though, for leap years, right?
You know, we only release it on leap years.
Oh, good, yeah.
Was this year a leap year? No, I think next.
Last year was, 2024.
Is it every 4 years?
Every 4 years, yeah, except sometimes it's not.
Yeah, because it's weird.
Yeah, because we have a bad calendar system.
It was good at one point in time, but then they started adding in all sorts of extra months, and then they were like, oh, we're going to not be able to track all the days accurately, so we gain all this time, so then we just have to have an extra day every year. And instead of giving it on a extra day like at the end of the year or something somewhere where it made sense, they just tacked it on the shortest month of the year. So then when the miserable winter weather is going on, it just drags on one day further. But regardless, we're almost there again, back to winter.
Almost there. But before we get to winter, we should probably get on with this episode and talk about what we've recently been playing. So, Seth, what have you been recently playing?
Recently, I've been playing a game called Tiny Bookshop, which was released back in August of this month. As of recording, 2025. It was developed by Neoludic Games and published by Skystone Games, where you play as somebody who has a little car with a little trailer attached to it, and in that trailer you sell books, and you drive into towns, and you open up your little trailer, and people come and buy books. And it's fun. It's cozy. It's one of those cozy games. There's some management that goes on because you have to stock the right type of books, and you have to have a good decoration set up, and you have to go to the right area of town to be able to maximize your book throughput. But if you don't really care about statistics, you really don't have to do that. You can just kind of sell them as you will, and people will buy books as you come along. The different books, there's crime, fantasy, classical, travel, facts, think something else, but they're all different colors, and so when you put them on your bookshelf, you can make pretty colors and designs. You can make them one color per bookshelf, and you can design your bookshelf, and I believe shelves in the future, so that when people come in to shop your little tiny bookshop, it's a pleasant environment to shop, and all the books are pleasingly in the right order. Or you can make chaos and make colors every other and make it a disaster. Either or, you can paint your bookshop, you can set out decorations and all that. It's a fun, cute little cozy game that if you wanted to play something where you didn't really want to have any sort of competition or trying to be stressed about getting something done in time, you can play Tiny Bookshop. It's a great little game. It is overwhelmingly positive on Steam, and it came out August 7th, so that's pretty impressive. And it is $19.99. I think there's a lot of replayability while you're playing through it based on how cozy it is, and it is also currently popular.
Great.
Zach, what have you been recently playing?
I've been playing Heretic plus Hexen. Night Dive put out Heretic plus Hexen back in actually this month, August 2025, and it is a remastered version of both Heretic and Hexen. These games were originally released by Raven Software in 1994 and 1995 respectively. However, Night Dive went in and redid the games so that they are in crisp 4K with better resolutions and better frames and stuff like that. Hexen and Heretic are great games. They were built in the Doom engine. They do a lot of heavy lifting in the Doom engine, though, to make them feel a lot different than Doom. Instead of being a sci-fi shoot all the demons game, both are fantasy first-person shooters where you fight different fantasy monsters. And in Heretic, you are playing as like a wizard who has magical powers. In Hexen, you have the option of playing as a fighter, cleric, or mage. Fighters are primarily melee. Clerics use a mixture of magic and melee, and mages are primarily magic. They're really fun games, and Night Dive did a great job at remastering these, and it was really cool to just see it pop up in my Steam library without having to buy it, because I already owned Hexen and Heretic as the original versions that Steam had available. So when Night Dive released this remastered version, they just gave it to you if you already owned the games, which is very nice. I want companies to continue doing that, where they remaster games and then just give them to me for free. I would like that. But yeah, Night Dive uses the Kex engine for this game, which is what they use for pretty much all of their first-person shooters. The Kex engine is able to really accurately recreate Doom engine, Jedi engine, build engine style games, but also give you all the quality of life improvements that you would expect from a remaster. And not only did they include Heretic and Hexen, they also included Heretic, Death Kings of the Dark Citadel, which was an expansion pack from 1996, and they released 2 new episodes that they worked on with id Software Bethesda, Faith Renewed and Vestiges of Grandeur. Along with this, there is also crossplay between platforms, co-op up to 16 players, local split screen, a new soundtrack, mod support, and a ton of other goodies. If you love classic first-person shooters, I recommend Heretic plus Hexen. It is $14.99 on Steam, or you might already have it. Again, if you owned Heretic or Hexen, you might have just received the game for free, and those games sometimes were dirt cheap, so a lot of people might already have those games. But yeah, I would recommend picking it up if you want to play some fantasy first-person shooter goodness. To get into today's episode, it is our, as Seth noted before, it's our 300th episode. It's also my birthday today, to dox myself right there, just so people know.
Happy birthday. You should play some confetti noises or something.
To celebrate both amazing things, my birthday and our 300th episode, producer Doug has locked us in the studio and told us, and I quote, "If you mention Tommy Westfall, Batman, or Sonic lore one more time, I will never pay you again," which is hilarious because we don't get paid and we don't pay him. So I don't know what he means. No.
Neither do I.
To get on his good side, we decided to open up the CGB vault and dive into an old topic, but take a new look at it. And we're revisiting SSI, or Strategic Simulations Incorporated. Now, we talked about SSI way back. It was actually in single digits episodes. I think it was either 8 or 6 or something like that.
8.
But it was way back when. And we've done these reduxes before. We did a redux of talking about Journeyman.
Didn't we do a Dragon Sphere redux or I think we did a Dragon Sphere redux. Yeah,
we might have done a Dragon. Yeah, I think we did do a Dragon Sphere redux.
I don't think we did a Phantom redux.
Well, guess what we're doing for episode
we might have done
350.
a Phantom redux.
Well, we'll do another redux.
Redux. But we do reduxes when we decide that the episode's been old enough that people who listen today weren't listening before, and we can recover a topic all over again.
Also, like, I'll even go back and listen to the old episode, and I'll see what exactly we talked about and how deep we went into the history of something. And sometimes we really were just kind of bare minimum, like briefly covering the history, then listing all the games they made.
Yes, and now we'll do bare minimum +1. fun. It's like a topic for us is like an onion. We like to start from the outside and work our way slowly into the core of the onion, one peel at a time, and every peel is an episode. So if we first just talk about SSI as a concept, then we talk about the history of SSI, then we talk about the games that SSI did, then we actually talk about a particular game and the history behind that game. Maybe we'll talk about the gameplay, and slowly we'll peel back the onion till, like episode 700, when you finally listen to an episode you wanted to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Well, to get into today's episode about SSI and to get into the history of SSI, SSI was founded by Joel Billings. Billings was a huge fan of wargaming, and he wanted to get a job with the company Avalon Hill, who were probably the biggest name in wargame publishing at the time, basically since their founding in the 1950s. Avalon Hill is the company that made the games that inspired Dungeons and Dragons. It was the company that inspired Gary Gygax. It is a huge name in wargaming. Billings had this idea for a computer war game, and he actually brought it to Avalon Hill and said, "Are you interested in this game?" And they said, "No, we are not interested in this game." Billings said, "I am interested in making this game." So he did. And he decided to start his own company. After finishing college in 1979 and with a $1,000 investment, Billings would start the company Strategic Simulations Incorporated. He would hire on John Lyons as a programmer, and John would get started on developing Computer Bismarck, which he developed in BASIC. Now, Billings would also hire on Ed Williger, who would write the game Computer Ambush, also in BASIC. So they were working on two games around the same time. The original version of Computer Bismarck was actually written on a North Star microcomputer, and I did a little research. I couldn't find the exact model, but it was likely the North Star Horizon, as that would have been available at the time. And that was the intention, was they developed it on the North Star. They were actually going to publish it for the TRS-80. An executive from Apple Computers, Trip Hawkins, who would later be, I believe, one of the founders of Electronic Arts, would talk to Billings and would convince him that the games should not be developed for the TRS-80 or developed on the North Star computers, but rather they should be developed and released for the Apple II, because Apple II could do better graphics than the North Star. And Billings was convinced, and the game's development would be switched from North Star computers to the Apple II, and the original version of Computer Bismarck would release in 1980.
Computer Bismarck is a turn-based computer game where you play as British forces and go against the German battleship, the Bismarck. The game has a computer opponent who controls the Germans, or a second player can play as them as well. Players earn points by destroying opponents' units, and the game ends when either a set number of turns elapse or the Bismarck sinks. The winner is who has the most points. The design of the game was influenced by Fox and the Hounds style games, where the enemy players, the Hounds, would search for the player, the Fox. During development, both Billings and Lyons were still working full-time, so development was done at Billings' apartment at night. Lyons would be the main programmer, with Billings primarily doing design work and minor programming. Billings would meet with Louis Seiko, a graphic designer. Billings had a vision that his games would be released similarly to Avalon's Hill games, complete with a colorful box, detailed manuals, and maps. Maps are truly a lost gem that we lost with the somewhat death of the big box PCs. Seikow worked with Billings on designing the final artwork, and Billings began packaging the game into boxes that he had to store in his bedroom because they did not have any storage facilities. To advertise, Billings distributed flyers to the Apple II owners and showed the game off at AppleFest. He would also buy a full-page advertisement in Byte, B-Y-T-E magazine. The work seemed to pay off, as people were fairly positive on Computer Bismarck when it was released. One reviewer called it a milestone in development of commercial war games, and another referred to the game as engrossing, but criticized the graphics, which, dude, Pound Sand, it's the Apple II, what other graphics are you criticizing against? But anyway, in a later review in 1988, Bob Proctor of Computer Gaming World stated that Computer Bismarck was the first serious war game for a microcomputer and helped legitimize the genre of wargaming.
With some money in their pockets, SSI began cracking down. They put out an advertisement advertisement that stated their games would take you from Waterloo to the Super Bowl by way of the North Atlantic. And in 1982, they launched the Rapid Fire brand of games. I was reading that this was a kind of misleading branding because when you hear Rapid Fire, at least when I hear Rapid Fire, I think of like an action game. Like I'm thinking of playing like Contra or Galaga or Space Invaders even. No, this was just their name for third-party authors putting out games under their label. Some of these early games would be Galactic Gladiators and Epidemic, which were published by SSI but developed by, one or two people teams that they just brought in to work on these single games. The Rapid Fire line would come to an end, actually only a few years later, but SSI soon found a new niche, role-playing games. Some of their first role-playing games would be Fantasy, spelled Phantasie, Questron, and Wizard's Crown. However, in 1987, they hit gold box, if you would, because SSI would acquire the license for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons from TSR. And with that was born the Gold Box line of games. Gold Box games are likely what I think people who have ever heard of SSI probably think of. So if you hear SSI, you probably think of Gold Box games. They were largely very popular, and SSI made a ton of them. They also had a very distinct look to them. Each box is gold, hence the name Gold Box. And they always had very detailed artwork, usually a fantasy image that had something to do with the game. Though I looked at some of their artwork, I don't know if it actually has much to do with the game. I think sometimes it was just fantasy images.
Yeah, so it was part of the course for D&D stuff that was coming out during that time.
Right.
Where it was that over-the-top sword and sorcery style of art. It's really Jeff Easley, and just look up all the images that he painted. He pretty much defined that type of fantasy artwork. He was one of the main painters in that time period, and his stuff was always like people would do things in the style of Jeff Easley. And there were other painters of that time period, but yeah, it was definitely very much over-the-top pulp fantasy.
Now, the first of the Gold Box games was Pool of Radiance, which not only set the tone of future Gold Box releases, but also became the base engine for some of the future titles. Pool of Radiance is similar to just playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons, in that you start out by building a party of characters, up to 6. You get to pick race, gender, class, and you can assign ability scores. There are only 4 classes: Fighter, Cleric, Magic User, and Thief, though there is an option to multi-class for non-human characters, and if you're too lazy to do all of this, they have pre-generated characters that you could just load in, so you don't have to worry about doing all the ability scores yourself. You can have the computer do it for you. The game has kind of an explorative vibe to it. You explore these dungeons and such, and you actually explore from a first-person view, though this is on an Apple II, so don't expect it to look like Doom. Expect it to look like a PowerPoint presentation, going one screen at a time. And the screen was also very small. It was a small little box in the left corner, with the rest of the screen being taken up by your party details and a narrative description of what you're seeing. During combat, the game would switch to a kind of isometric view where you saw the party as different sprites, and they would go against the enemies that would also be on the screen. The story of the game takes place in the city of Phlan, Phlan, located in the Forgotten Realms. Phlan has been heavily damaged by various evil enemies, and your task is to drive out the monsters. Actually, the way you get to Phlan is kind of funny. Your character arrives under false pretenses. The people of Phlan have been sending out rumors that there is a treasure there because they want adventurers to come and kill the monsters. So they have been spreading lies about their city to get people like your character to arrive, and that is where the game begins.
And I just want to make a note here, as D&D has become relatively popular in mainstream media, if you're listening to this episode and thinking, I'm going to go back and play some Gold Box D&D games, be prepared. They are a little tough to play, mostly because you use the keyboard to navigate the entire game in a very unintuitive way. So when you think that maybe the key would be up, the up arrow or W, it's like T, Z, weird insert keys. I felt like I was playing the piano with the amount of keystrokes that I was doing across the keyboard. So just be aware, because I've gone back and played these games before. We had some of them growing up. We had some on 3.5. We'll talk about some of them ones later. I believe we had Pool of Radiance, and then we definitely had Curse of the Azure Bonds. On release, Pool of Radiance came with a 28-page introduction booklet that goes over the game and its concepts, which is helpful, especially if you've never played D&D. It also includes a guide on party creation, also helpful if you've never played D&D. There is also a 38-page adventurer's journal, which includes different story elements. The DOS, Apple II, and Mac version also came with a code wheel to translate Elvish and Dwarven languages into English. This also acted as DRM, or copy protection, as you need the code wheel to start the game. And SSI did this a lot.
Yeah.
They DRM'd their games in very, go into this manual and look up on page 32 what is the response to this. They'll do that with later games, such as Dark Sun. It was something funny and also something that was really annoying, especially if you buy modern versions of the games. Sometimes the copy protection is not overridden and you have to find the file that you have to go into the drive and figure out where the game manual is, or download it from the Good Old Game website and then go back and readjust it. It's sometimes annoying. Now, at the time that Pool of Radiance came out in 1988, D&D was still pretty popular. It wasn't as popular as it is today, where I think it's kind of gone super mainstream, but it still had its fans, and those fans generally owned computers. And Pool of Radiance sold well because the guys who owned computers or who were really into computing were also into D&D.
Surprisingly, nerds have very similar interests.
I actually looked up a picture. Well, I was on Facebook, and Margaret Weiss, who wrote Dragonlance, along with Tracy Hickman and Laura Hickman, released a photo recently. I think today. I think she put up a photo of a photograph that she found in her drawer that was a picture of the TSR. It was TSR at the time, which was the D&D company at the same time that SSI was selling TSR games. She posted this photo, and I looked at this photo that she posted of the old TSR company, and all the guys looked alike, and they were all that kind of older, nerdy looking man and their wives was what the pictures looked like. Now, mind you, some of the women were not just their wives, obviously. They were creative leaders in their own right. Dragonlance was, in fact, Laura Hickman's, I think, idea versus Tracy. And so, the women had an influence. But the men all looked like men who owned computers and played SSI games along with D&D. I say that to say that it sold. Pool of Radiance, as a D&D licensed property, sold really well. It sold around initially 264,536 copies, which for a PC game in 1988 was great. Players loved the game. Dragon gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Commodore User gave it a 9 out of 10, and Game Machine gave it an 89%. They would go on and write a novelization written by James Ward and Jane Cooper Hong and published by TSR. There was also a port to the PC 9801 computer in Japan, which was released featuring a fully Japanese translation, and there was a port to the Famicom NES. The NES version would be sold under the name Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Pool of Radiance and be the only version to feature a complete soundtrack. An official game sequel would be released in 1989 called Curse of the Azure Bonds, which also would serve as a sequel to the 1988 novel Azure Bonds. Despite being built in the same engine, Curse of the Azure Bonds would feature some updates, such as better graphics and the addition of the Paladin and Ranger as a class. People loved the sequel as well, and sold about 179,795 copies on release, with a third being for the C64. And the game once again critically scored well. Dragon gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, ZZap64 gave it an 86%, and Amiga Joker gave it a 74%. The game was released on MS-DOS, the Macintosh, the Apple II, the Atari ST, the C64, the Amiga, and the PC-98. And a port was planned for the SNES, but would go on to be canceled. A third and fourth game, Secret of the Silver Blades and Pools of Darkness, would follow in 1990 and 1991, respectively. Both versions built on the previous and continued the same story that Pool of Radiance started. I honestly think like these original games, I think they really just aged themselves out over time. Like I think they were like good games, and they still are pretty decent games. They have really good stories. The graphics aren't horrible. I think the combat is probably the one that aged the most because it's kind of flat, and the controls. I would say the controls and the combat, like the controls aged the most gameplay wise, and the combat aged the most graphically wise. Yeah. But like the thing about exploring a picture frame by frame, it's kind of like missed. It's kind of almost timeless because the drawings are drawn that you're exploring. So like it's not like it's degraded in that way. And the story is still good, albeit probably not as complex as stories in some games today, but it's also D&D. Do you really want a super complex game?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And these are all worlds that, people familiar with D&D and Forgotten Realms and such, they still are around. So if you are, doing a D&D campaign now and you play Pool of Radiance, there's probably going to be some things that are going to cross over and reference, and things that you might even encounter in your own game. Now, at the same time that the Pool of Radiance series was being developed, SSI would put out other gold box games. They didn't just focus on Pool of Radiance. They had other titles, specifically the Savage Frontier games and the Dragonlance games. They also would create some non-Dungeons & Dragons gold box games, specifically the Buck Rogers games that they would produce using the same engine.
I think something I just want to mention specifically in regards to Dragonlance. So Pool of Radiance and Savage Frontier are both set in Forgotten Realms, which was one of the primary D&D worlds. There's the Forgotten Realms, there is Greyhawk, and then there's Dragonlance is another D&D world. So Greyhawk is a separate D&D world, and Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms has Driscoll Warden and R.A. Salvatore, and it has a lot of novelizations built in it. It's one of the main realms. It has the Sword Coast in it, which has Neverwinter and Waterdeep and where all those things. There's a big joke that the Sword Coast is the Remembered Realms, and the rest of it is Forgotten Realms. Savage Frontier takes place in Chult, I believe, which is like the jungle world, the jungle part of the Forgotten Realms. But Dragonlance was its own thing. The games, I believe the Gold Box games at least, were relatively in line with Gold Box. They did come later, so they were getting more and more outdated. Even by the Champions of Krynn, which we owned, was 1990, and then Death Knights of Krynn was 91, and the Dark Queen of Krynn was 92. And the Savage Frontier, Gateway to Savage Frontier, and Treasures of Savage Frontier were 91, 92. By 92, the engine that ran these games was dated, right? It was getting to the point where it was like SSI needed to do something different, and we'll talk about how they did that. But Dragonlance was also supported by novels that were originally supposed to sell modules.
Right.
So they wrote modules, and they wrote a novel to prop up the modules. And what ended up happening was that the Dragonlance books sold so incredibly well that people didn't want to play the modules because the characters in Dragonlance, Tanis and Cameron and Rastalin, like these characters become like so iconic in the Dragonlance world, and then you have to play essentially through their adventure with your own character, which is kind of just like you're like understudying for some of these great characters that are designed and really propped up to be some of the best characters in fantasy. Another point that I want to just make about Dragonlance in particular is that, and maybe we'll do a Dragonlance episode because there's other Dragonlance video games that weren't done by SSI that we can talk about.
Yeah.
And they're mostly all bad, right? Dragonlance does not have good games. They don't have any good media outside the books. That's like this thing with Dragonlance is the books are the best. Don't stray outside the books. But the one thing that Dragonlance did for the genre is if you think about the genre before Dragonlance, it was like Conan the Barbarian. Pulp fantasy. Different than Tolkien fantasy. And people wanted pulp fantasy at that time and not really Tolkien fantasy. And now Tolkien fantasy has kind of become more of the predominant fantasy, especially with like Peter Jackson movies and stuff like that. Dragonlance is really kind of a bridge between pulp and Tolkien. It's it's more Tolkien-like, but it's also not as esoteric as Tolkien can be. Like, Tolkien, the wizards are angels. Like, there's like these things that are happening in the Tolkien world that are just a little bit more esoteric. But like in Dragonlance, the wizards are magicians that can be trained, which is what we think of wizards nowadays. So like a lot of what are like traditional fantasy thoughts, we credit Tolkien, but a lot of it should be credited back to Margaret Weiss and the Dragonlance group, Tracy and Laura Hickman, for the development of the world. Because I feel like the popularity of it like really just pulls through and kind of brought everyone's fantasy out of the Conan barbarian fantasies, kind of touching Tolkien, but not as esoteric. It just kind of became our like default fantasy setting.
Now, another interesting deviation from the typical gold box titles was Neverwinter Nights, which shouldn't be confused with Neverwinter Nights, the BioWare game from 2001, or Neverwinter, the 2013 MMO, or Neverwinter, the city. However, it does share some similarities to the more recent Neverwinter MMO because the 1991 Neverwinter Nights, created by SSI, was in fact one of the first MMO RPGs, and it was built in the Gold Box engine and powered by America Online, AOL. All those words I just said feel a million years old.
That's wild. If you had to pay for your internet minutes and also pay for your Neverwinter Nights.
Yeah. Now, Neverwinter Nights, the MMO, was a co-development from Beyond Software, SSI, and AOL. And yeah, it would be one of the very first graphical multiplayer role-playing games. The design of the game started when Don Baglow and Beyond Software began to work with AOL to come up with different ideas for a game. They threw out some ideas like different text-based games. They had ideas for graphical games. They were just throwing anything they could at AOL and seeing what stuck. But the major issue they were running into was speed. Modems at the time were slow. By 1989, Beyond Software had teamed up with SSI, and they were actually working on Pool of Radiance and the Gold Box engine when they realized that, hey, these turn-based RPG games that we're developing in this engine might actually do pretty well with some slow bandwidth and some slow speeds because they're turn-based and because they're slow. So the team would meet up with AOL and convince them that this project was feasible, and AOL said, okay, here's some money, and they said, just make sure the game goes live, and they set a go-live date of March 1991. On release, Neverwinter Nights was praised. It was actually really popular. Computer and Gaming World noted that the human element makes the Gold Box experience much better. And per a GameSpy review, the game had hundreds of players. One report estimated that by 1997, there were a total of 115,000 players, and typically about 2,000 adventurers playing during prime hours. That's wild numbers for a 1990s MMO. You would think with all this success, this MMO experience must have kept going, but no. Actually, AOL closed the game in 6 years. They closed it in 1997, making a lot of people really sad. So sad, in fact, that after its closure, there was a fan-made clone called Forgotten World, which was released in 2003 and had servers running until 2015. Fans of the game also attempted to reconstruct Neverwinter Nights, the 1991 game, in the 2000s Neverwinter Nights by BioWare using a tool set that BioWare included in their release. This was called Neverwinter Nights Resurrection and would actually run until 2012. And it was fairly popular, though it did have some limits in terms of its size and how many players could be playing at once due to just the overall scope of the team and also the capabilities of 2002's Neverwinter Nights. There was also a single player conversion released in 2012, which I think it's fun that it took that long to make a single player conversion. But that actually used the Unlimited Adventures Toolkit, which was made by SSI and released in 1993. The Unlimited Adventures Toolkit is really fun because it's basically the Gold Box sandbox. It is a tool that you can use to make your own Gold Box games, and I'm really glad that SSI published that because I feel like that's very much a Dungeons & Dragons type of thing, is to like, all right, here are our campaigns, now make your own.
Outside of the Gold Box games, SSI would publish and develop other Dungeons & Dragons titles, such as games set in the Dark Sun campaign or games set in the Ravenloft campaign. And Ravenloft has had a resurgence lately with the release of the very popular module Curse of Strahd, complete with like the super premium edition that comes in a coffin type deal. Very popular. Curse of Strahd, though, in the Ravenloft world is just, Barovia is just one of the realms of Ravenloft. Ravenloft is this weird mist that settles that allows you to go to different worlds. It's just the games that we had, Zach and I, we had a Dark Sun game and we had a Ravenloft Stone Prophet game. They both took place in just worlds that weren't really supported or known about even today. They're just odd places. Dark Sun is a fascinating world, not really popular right now, and wasn't really that popular when I was playing in the 90s. So like there were people that played Dark Sun and people knew about it, but it wasn't, it's wild that it got a video game.
It got 3, including an MMO. The third game was an MMO.
Yeah, it's wild. Ravenloft, the first one, was in fact pretty much the one that's popular now, but the second one, also weird that it took place in the desert. So we owned Shattered Lands, which was the first of the 3 Dark Sun games published by SSI, and we also owned Stone Prophet, the second of the 2 Ravenloft games that SSI would produce. I'm curious of why we got, I don't know if I bought them. I think I did, from like Buck-a-Book or something. The Stone Prophet is kind of a scary game.
It had a scary cover. Kids. It had the mummy on it.
It did have a scary cover. Dark Sun uses a top-down perspective and a turn-based role-playing structure. The 2 Ravenloft games were first-person and real-time. Well, they were technically turn-based, but you didn't realize the turn-based. It didn't pause.
Yeah, it's like quick turn-based.
It was quick turn-based because everyone got their turn. It was just like there was no like pause. Decide what you want to do. It was like the screaming of the vultures while you're putting it there. Yeah, and I would tell Zach to put in the vulture scream, but it is so obnoxious that I think that it could probably scare people. But regardless, Ravenloft Stone Prophet is a trip. I'm actually playing through Ravenloft Stone Prophet at this time. And I'm making my way through the world today. There was also a previous SSI title that was called Benzobaranzan, which I believe you play as Drisk. You're releasing the Underdark. I don't know if you play as Drisk, but I feel like Drisk is on the cover of Benzobaranzan, the game. Benzobaranzan used the same engine that the Ravenloft games would use and was also set in first person. So some people think that like Benzobaranzan and then the Ravenloft games are all like sequential, but it's really just Benzobaranzan by itself, and then the Ravenloft games are actually sequel to each other, but you could play all of them separately and be fine.
Benzobaranzan uses a lot of the same art. Like I'm looking at a screenshot. That guy on the right.
Oh yeah.
There's a version of that guy, just he doesn't have an eye patch in Stone Prophet.
Yeah, so they do use the same art. In the Stone Prophet games, you can actually import your Strahd characters into the Stone Prophet game, and then go in like super like decked out with equipment because you're part of the same faction. To give everyone a little history and to get us kind of back on topic here, the Dark Sun campaign setting was originally introduced as part of D&D's 2nd edition. It distanced itself from the typical medieval fantasy of Forgotten Realms by being more inspired by post-apocalyptic and almost a little science fiction-y, but definitely still fantasy setting. The Shattered Lands takes place in a city called Draj. It's a city-state that's run by a tyrannical king who runs gladiatorial games and is trying to eradicate anyone that is under his control. And you play as a gladiator who teams up with others to escape. I think Zach put in here that there's a little science fiction aspects to it. I don't, it's low magic is really what it is. So it's not necessarily science fiction. It's more of like no magic or low magic. And there is actually in Dark Sun, the magicians you have to be a special magician to be able to use magic. And if you use magic outside of being a special magician, you can be punished and they'll come after you. And they have these weird kings that there's like 12 prophet kings or something that I think are all dragons really, but they run the world and they have like these Templars that enforce there.
So I was reading that part of the inspiration for Dark Sun is a genre called planetary romance, which is this older sci-fi genre that was like in the 50s and the 60s, kind of that atomic age sci-fi stuff. But in planetary romance in particular, you don't always go in spaceships to get places. Sometimes you fly on magic carpets or astral project.
Yeah, which you can do in Dark Sun.
Yes. So like I think that's why I kind of refer to it as science fiction, because it is a type of science fiction. It's just not, it's different than
Traditional
like
science fiction.
Yeah, it's different than like a space opera, or like we might think of with Star Wars or Dune, and it's different than maybe more traditional science fiction like Star Trek or even more modern science fiction. But it's kind of its own weird science fiction.
It is. It's certainly weird. Part of the Dark Sun world is that like metal is hard to come by, so everyone uses like bone and
yes,
brittle weapons that break over time, stone weapons and bone weapons. There's also a fun spread of different races that aren't normally in D&D that you can play as in Dark Sun, including half giants who are half man, half giant, mules who are half dwarf, half man, and are sterile, and trichenes, which are 100% all insect.
Yeah.
And they speak telepathically. I think we did talk about Dark Sun as my recently played, because I was playing as Moab, and the half giant who led a group of half giants. I think I got really mad because I got to the end of the game and I lost because the final boss was a pain in the butt. Ravenloft is similarly is a separate campaign setting that beyond both the Forgotten Realms and Dark Sun. It takes place primarily in a pocket universe called the Demiplane of Dread, which has different domains, and each domain is ruled by a different Dark Lord, such as Strahd von Zarovich, who is the vampire that rules over Barovia, or what's his name?
Ankpat. I wrote it down.
Ankpat. Who runs Harakir, which is the setting that Stone Prophet is in. The first Ravenloft PC game takes place in Barovia, and you have to deal with Strahd. The second one takes place in Harakir, where you have to deal with Ankpat. The first one is based on the Ravenloft module, which has Strahd, who goes to Castle Ravenloft. The second one is actually based on Touch of Death, which is a module that is all about Harakir. And it's kind of a crappy place. There are also other Dark Lords. Learning about the other Dark Lords is kind of fascinating in a D&D world setting, because I think one's like a doll, just like a regular old like puppeteer doll. They're just, some of them are just odd Dark Worlds, and it makes sense why. And they all have their own little mini pocket dimension worlds. Regardless, Harakir is a desert land. It's heavily inspired by ancient Egypt, and that's where Stone Prophet's set in. There is the Dark Lord Ankpat, who's a mummy who lives in his tomb and craves mortality. He craves to wake up. And Harakir is a wasteland with only a small community of people who are suffering from malnutrition, thirst, and being overall jerks, because the people in the town are just they're all jerks. I'm currently playing through the game right now. I have my dwarf named Dwarg, which is Dwarg is it's a dwarf with a G instead of an F at the end, and he is a fighter cleric. And then he's hanging out with Riley, who is a elven thief mage, and they're teamed up with Trajan Kent, who is probably the greatest man alive in this world. He is a ranger, and he's no idea why he's there, but he's just wicked mad and just wants to get out, and constantly has side comments. When talking to people, he'll be like, "This is stupid. We shouldn't trust this person." And also Hark Tor, who is a Wimmick, which is a man who is half man, half lion, and he can jump. He's also naked for most of the game because he lost his armor. So you have to find his armor, because he can't wear any other armor except his armor, because he is once again half man, half lion. He's like a centaur, so it's not like his head's a lion. It's it's like his body's a lion and his head's a man, which I guess is the better combination of things. D&D does have this race called the Leonins, who are like, they're kind of like half man, half lions, except their top halves are lions and their bottom halves are men. And I feel like probably would have, if you get the genetic lottery, get the part with the I guess, I don't know, maybe just be one all the way. Like, I guess thumbs are pretty useful. But yeah, so that's Stone Prophet. The Dark Sun Shattered Lands and The Wake of the Ravager are more traditional RPGs. They're turn-based. There's some puzzles, there's some dungeons, there's some RPG elements where you're talking to people and trying to help people out and solve problems for people. Stone Prophet and Ravenloft are hack and slashes. They're dungeon crawling hack and slashes. There's some plot and some puzzles, but it's mostly just hacking and slashing and flame striking everything. I pretty much, when I play the Stone Prophet game, I run around, I stab a bunch of things, then I rest, and then I continue to stab things.
Now, while the original Dark Sun games they all have like mixed reviews, Dragon in particular, Dragon Magazine did not like the Dark Sun games. They gave them like 2 stars out of 5, I think, for both the original games. Both Ravenloft titles were well received and got strong reviews from contemporary magazines at the time and are still considered, pretty fun games to play. And I know that Stone Prophet in particular is very quotable because Seth and I always quote the opening.
Of what alignment is this stranger? Lawful neutral, you say? Interesting.
Fun fact, in Strahd's Possession, you have the same person generate your characters. So
the woman with the cards, yeah.
Yeah, the tarot reader.
Now, SSI did not just do these games. They also had a couple other... They were producing so much Dungeons & Dragons games, but they did have another major Dungeons & Dragons series that they were involved in, and that was the Eye of the Beholder games, which were primarily developed by Westwood, but SSI would publish them. The Eye of the Beholder games are set in the Forgotten Realms, with the first game being set in Waterdeep, and they also play similarly to Ravenloft in that they are first person and are kind of hack and slashes, but also more RPG style, more like dungeon crawlers, kind of like Grimrock. Now, the first Eye of the Beholder game, which came out in 1991, would, interestingly enough, be ported over to the Game Boy Advance in 2002 for some reason, and the cover for it has a very ugly looking beholder on it. At some point in the 1990s, SSI would lose their D&D license, though interestingly enough, they would pick up the Warhammer 40k license and produce Final Liberation in 1997, Chaos Gate in 1998, and Rights of War in 1999. They would pretty much just put out a few more games and then close their doors. They actually would basically shutter in 2001, though prior to that, they would be acquired by Mindscape in 1994. They were briefly owned by Mattel, and then they would fully shut down in 2001. And throughout its history, SSI would release almost 200 games, which is a lot, though they were also around since the 70s. So they had enough time to put out over 200 games. Many of their games, including pretty much all of the gold box games, are still available, widely available on digital platforms such as Steam and GOG, and also frequently go on sale, and they're not also expensive games. So you can get them for all pretty cheap. I do want to say, reiterate rather, what Seth said, which is that your mileage may vary with some of these games. They can be tough, they can be a little archaic, they can also be fun. If you go into the game knowing what to expect, I think you'll probably have a good time. But if you're going into Pool of Radiance expecting it to be Baldur's Gate, don't play Pool of Radiance because you're expecting way too much out of a game that is decently old. But if you're going into Pool of Radiance looking for some kind of dumb Dungeons and Dragons from the 1980s, then yeah, have at it. Enjoy a very archaic game that uses a ton of keys on your keyboard for no reason. With that being said, I think that will do it for our SSI Redux, our SSI Revisited episode. And I think this is a great episode to use as kind of a branching off point for us to talk about future focused items, like maybe doing a Dragonlance episode, and maybe covering the Mystara games at some point, like the 2 Dungeons & Dragons fighting games that were produced by Capcom but published under SSI's name. So that could be fun.
And hopefully producer Doug is happy because this was one of the episodes that he wanted to hear.
I hope so too. I hope producer Doug gives us a big thumbs up and not a big sad face. And I hope he unlocks the door because otherwise we'll be sad. Now, to get into our retro rewind, Seth had me play a little game called The Rocketeer, released for the NES in 1991 and on a couple other systems. It is based on the film of the same name, which is based on the character of the same name. The Rocketeer is a a superhero guy. He flies around in a rocket, or with a rocket. He has like a jetpack. And in the game, you play as him, and you go around punching bad guys and occasionally shooting them with a gun. I did not like the game. I thought it was bad. I thought it was obnoxious. I thought the controls were stiff. I thought the music was annoying. The weapons didn't do a ton of damage. The enemies kept respawning. They were kind of also annoying. Like they would shoot you, you would duck, and then by the time you got a chance to shoot them, they were already shooting you again. Also, I had no idea how to fly or if that was a possibility. I assume it is, but I couldn't figure it out. It made me sad because the character is called the Rocketeer. I expected to do some rocketing, like maybe Rocket Knight, but no, I was more of just the running Rocketeer and the jumping Rocketeer and the occasionally falling Rocketeer, because the Rocketeer, surprisingly, is bad at jumping. Overall, I did not enjoy the game. I don't think it holds up. Next week, Seth, I want you to play Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City for the Super Nintendo.
I hate you. Zach had me play Light Crusader for the Sega Genesis, released in 1995 for the Japanese, European, and North American markets, and developed by Treasure and published by Sega. Treasure is a great company, and they do some great games. I think we should maybe do an episode about them later, but they did Gunstar Heroes and Alien Soldier, which are two other great games on the Sega Genesis. In Light Crusader, you play as Sir David, who is visiting the town of Green Row, and there are people missing, and people are worried that there is some kind of kidnapping. And after watching the longest intro around, where you can't skip it, and then getting told your mission and wandering around the town, finally I figured out that there was a secret in the graveyard that opened up a staircase to go down into the actual game, where there was dungeon and fighting. You fight monsters, you cast magic, you hit things with swords, you figure out puzzles such as like laser beams, trying to hit doors to open them and find keys to unlock it, and you go through this dungeon. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. The game felt tough, but as I was fighting monsters, they kept like throwing health packets at me as I was beating them, so like I kept getting healed back, and I felt like kind of like the game was helping, making sure that I was like not getting an early game over. It isn't a fixed isometric view, so sometimes perspective can be a little wonky because you could go into places where the camera can't necessarily see you. But overall, if you're looking for a good action RPG on the Sega Genesis, I don't think you could go wrong with Light Crusader. I think it was a pretty fun game, and it was definitely like up there in regards to quality that I would expect from Treasure. Next week, Zach, you can play Stronghold Crusader.
Great. I will. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you have any memories of playing some of the SSI games, let us know. You can email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on YouTube. Check us out, Classic Gaming Brothers. We're also available on Twitch. Also, we're available on social media, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. With that being said, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.